Hotels can hold some creepy secrets. With so many people checking in and out on a daily basis, it's no wonder stories of haunted hotels and bad encounters are so easy to find. Whether you're on vacation, getting together for a family reunion, or sneaking into one to perform a ritual, the strange doesn't discriminate and can present itself at any time. Today we will be going over 3 stories involving hotels. A huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, feel free to support it with a like and a comment letting me know your thoughts. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. A silhouette of a woman appears on the balcony. Her cigarette glow can be seen piercing through the darkness as I watch from a beach chair below. At that moment, I wonder who she is and what's going on through her head as she takes another drag from her cigarette. This thought, however, is interrupted as a stranger opens the patio door behind her and joins her on the balcony. The band playing at the jazz lounge drowns out any chances of me being able to hear the conversation between them. For a brief moment, I wanted them to be the distraction I so desperately needed from this boring drunk crowd that is within feet from me. The downside of vacation is having to deal with the annoying intoxicated people who believe the world spins around them and crave to be the center of attention, as I remain seated below them listening for any words shared between them like the cigarette that is now pressed against the stranger's lips. I swear as I lay there invading their privacy, the woman looks down towards my direction and screams for help. The jazz melody in the background makes me question what I heard. Was it actually a scream, or an out-of-tune instrument? Then as fast as the stranger had appeared, they retreat back into the room, with their arms wrapped around the woman, either in distress or passion. Then the sliding door closes, along with the curtains. I glance around to see if anyone else had witnessed what I was pretty confident I had seen. But to my surprise, everyone is too self-absorbed in their own business to wonder about the silhouettes on the balcony. Then I think to myself, I'm probably the only one that saw them. I'm probably the only one who actually cares at this point. I sort of envied the rest of the crowd that is left oblivious to it all. What do I do? Are the next 4 words that come creeping into my mind that's now filled with anxiety. Did I really see what I thought I had seen? Or is the darkness playing tricks on my mind, and that those 2 silhouettes are safe and sound behind those tightly drawn curtains, embracing each other and merging as one silhouette? Maybe I should just have another drink and try to loosen the hell up. After all, I am on vacation. I return from the bar with a fresh drink. The rum burns my lips as I resume sitting on the same beach chair. As I light my own cigarette, I see something in the corner of my eye. Again on the balcony above me. As I look up, my instincts tell me that this wasn't the woman who I had seen earlier. Instead, it was the stranger who re-emerged from the room. The stranger lights a Zippo lighter and ignites a big cigar that's sticking out of their mouth. The light from the Zippo lights up the dark just enough for me to make out enough facial features to determine the face of the stranger belonged to a man. I remain on the chair, watching to see if he's rejoined by the woman. After a few minutes of watching, it came clear that she wasn't joining him. It also came clear that I wasn't the only one doing the watching. I can feel his stare burn through the darkness, and his focus was set on me. I guess this is karma getting me for being so damn nosy. I stay there frozen to the beach chair, too petrified to move. Maybe it's just paranoia, and the man isn't watching me. Maybe it's my mind trying to draw up some elaborate story to save me from boredom. I didn't want to go on this trip, but my parents were hell-bent that I tag along. Maybe I'm overthinking everything, and that woman from before is asleep on the bed inside the room, or in the shower. I decided that I would forget it all, and finish up my drink, and go get some rest. Then this day would be over, and I will be one day closer to going home. As I walk back to my room, I can't shake the nervous feeling that has a hold of me. Walking through the hallway, I scan the faces of everyone I walk past, and wonder if any of them were the people from the balcony. Although I could distinguish it was a woman and a man. That was about all I could pick out, as the darkness prevented me from seeing much more. Then the nervousness grew in the pit of my stomach when I realized that any one of the passing faces in the hallway could belong to him, or her. And if I wasn't being paranoid, and that the man was actually staring me down, he could now be within hand's length of me now, and I wouldn't know it. I reached my door and swiped my key card, and barged in, flipping the Do Not Disturb sign before I closed the door. I then made sure the door was locked and the chain was bolted. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror, and then I thought to myself, get a hold on yourself. You've watched one too many horror movies, man. Still, the nervous pit in my stomach only grew larger. I walked over to the sliding glass door in my room, only mine didn't lead to a balcony. I was on the ground floor, so it just led directly outside. I stopped and pressed my face to the glass to try and see past my reflection, and I felt the nervousness disappear from my stomach when I saw there was no one around. I did, however, lock the sliding door. I would have done that regardless. I switched on the TV to provide the room with some background noise as I poured myself another rum to calm my nerves. I then turned on the shower and let it run for a few minutes. As I waited, I went back out into the room and took a few more swallows of rum. By now, the burning sensation had faded, and I was finally feeling the sweet nectar. Steam started to emerge from the bathroom, which meant the shower was hot enough for my liking now. As I stand there with near boiling water pouring down over me, and breathing in the steam through my mouth, I can't help to shake the image of the woman. Was she really screaming for help? Maybe I should report it to the front desk or security just in case. But I didn't want to appear to be another crazy tourist that couldn't handle the free booze. The thought, however, was quickly interrupted by an abrupt loud pounding on the bedroom door. I turned off the shower and waited in silence for a moment, but the silence was followed by another bang on the door. I hopped out of the shower, steam still in the air, and walked towards the bedroom door. The room door didn't have one of those peepholes, so I stood next to the door and asked loudly, "Who's there?" No response followed my question, only another loud bang on the door. Once again I asked, "Who's there?" And yet again there was no response. I was growing annoyed and yanked the door open. I had forgotten to unlatch the chain, so the door stopped solid, after only opening a few inches. The door did open up far enough for me to see that there was no one standing there. I closed the door just enough to unlatch the chain, and then open it back up. I stuck my head out the door, and looked both ways, and there wasn't anyone in the hallway. At this point I was starting to think that I was going crazy, but then I heard the knock again. However, it wasn't at the door. It was on my bedroom wall, and the knock was coming from the room next door. I slammed the door shut and made sure the chain was secure and in place again. I went over to the room phone and called the front desk. When I reached them, I complained to them that there was someone in the room next to me pounding hard on the wall. The clerk laughed and said, "I guess your neighbors are having fun." In which I replied it wasn't the two people messing around sound. It was someone hitting the wall hard with their fist, or something else. The clerk then took me more serious, and told me that they'd send security to check it out. A short while later I could hear security knocking on the room next door. I couldn't hear anything though, because the voices were muffled through the walls. About a minute after, there was a knock at my door. When I opened up, it was a security guard that worked for the hotel, and he introduced himself and told me he was there to investigate the commotion in the room next door. Before I could ask him anything, he looked at me straight in the face and asked me if I was sure I heard something. I told him yes, and that there was no way to mistake what I had heard. His face changed from the concerned look to the pissed off look, and told me that there's no one in the room next to me. And then he added that I probably just heard the water pipes, or someone walking in the hallway. For the sake of not sounding totally crazy, I just shook my head and agreed with him. Then apologized for the inconvenience. I closed the door for what I hoped to be the last time for that night, and went back to watching the TV to distract me from this entire evening. Just as the movie finally grabbed my focus, it was soon broken by another bang, this time on the bedroom door. I muted the TV and walked towards the door once again, as I had done several times that night. This time I unlatched the chain quickly, so that whoever was there didn't have time to hide away. To be honest, I was growing tired of this. As I flung open the door, my two parents were standing there. They asked me where did I go. They had seen me go to the bar last and didn't return. I told them I got tired and didn't want to ruin their night, so I snuck back to my room to grab a shower and head to bed. I wanted so badly to tell them what I had seen, but now I was so convinced with the entire situation that an undeniable doubt had formed. I reassured them that everything was okay, and that I would meet them in the morning for breakfast. My mother gave me a hug and they walked down the hallway to their room. I stood there watching until I was certain they were in their room. I then turned off the TV and put my sneakers back on and headed once again for the bar. This time as I sipped on my drink, I didn't return to the beach chair that I had previously laid on earlier that night. I just sat at a bar stool that had a perfect view of the balcony from a different angle. I sat there smoking my cigarettes, gazing at the balcony in hopes that the woman was there, so that my mind could be set at ease. But she wasn't. A man pulled up a stool next to me and ordered a drink. At first I didn't pay much attention to him, but in the corner of my eye, I could tell he was paying attention to me. Lovely night, the man said as he placed his drink on the coaster next to my own. I just looked at him and gave him a slight nod to acknowledge his comments. I didn't want to interact with him, so I anticipated that would end the conversation. I can't help but notice that you've been hanging out here all alone tonight. Is there anyone with you? This comment struck me hard and sent shivers through my body. That comment would be odd no matter how my night had panned out, but given what I had seen earlier, I knew that this was the man from the balcony. I looked at the man and gave him a fake smile. I told him that my parents were around here somewhere, and that I was just sitting here enjoying the music. A grin crept across his face at the sound of my words. The conversation ended there, and so did my drink. I casually got up from the bar stool and headed back to my room. I looked over my shoulder a few times to make sure I wasn't being followed. I knew now that I wasn't being paranoid. Once I got back to my room, I closed the door and locked it swiftly. As I turned around to go to my bed, I noticed that my patio door was open, and on my nightstand was a note that read, "You saw nothing. Keep your mouth shut." I stood there for a moment frozen and contemplating my next move. The man knew which room was mine, so I no longer felt safe, and I knew no tiny chain could stop him from getting me. My instincts took over, and before I knew it, I was back in the hallway making my way towards my parents' room. When I finally reached room 144, I knocked fast and hard, making sure that my parents heard me immediately. When my father opened the door, he sensed the panic on my face, and without hesitation, hauled me into the room. By now, my mom was awake with the lights turned on in the room, and both of them looked at me puzzled. They asked me what was wrong, and before I knew it, I was telling them everything. Once I was done, I could tell by the looks on their faces that they doubted my story, but before I could let them speak, I took the note out of my pocket and showed it to them. Then without question, my father was on the phone calling security to the room. Security took their sweet time getting to the room, and when they did, my parents repeated everything to them that I had just told them. My father wanted to deal with it because he said that I had gone through enough for one night. At first, the security officer didn't seem to take it seriously, and I could tell he was growing adjusted. Then, to put us at ease, he told us he would go check it out. I was now beyond tired, but I was hell-bent on fighting sleep. I needed answers. A short while later, there came knocks on the bedroom door. When we opened this time, we saw the security officer was back, along with local authorities. I told them everything again. I was getting frustrated and sick of telling them over and over because I didn't want to have to relive it every time. This time when I was done speaking, the lead officer told me that I need to try my best to remember everything about the man at the bar. I asked him why, in which he told me that he is now a person of interest in a crime scene. When the morning came, the balcony above the beach chair was tapped off with yellow caution tape, and from below I could see forensic units dusting for fingerprints and taking photos. The officer had told me the night before that when security arrived at the room, no one was there, but the blood on the floor and sliding glass door was enough evidence to determine that someone was murdered there, but there was nobody. All the woman's personal items were left in the room, including her passports. I had learned from one of the hotel workers that day that she was a solo traveler. She was recently divorced and came here to get a break from everything. By noon, the local media was reporting the case, and soon later it was rumored that there was a warrant out for the woman's ex-husband. He had arrived in the country the previous day, and authorities now wanted to speak with him because he was a person of interest. I was unable to identify him though, because when the detective showed me his passport photo, I told him that I didn't get a good look at him the night before, and that I wasn't sure if it was him or not. The worst part came later that evening though, because by then it became a double homicide. The police finally checked the room next to mine that I had reported the loud banging from, and once they were inside they found 2 bodies inside the room. The first one was the woman from the balcony. The second one belonged to the woman's ex-husband. The police ruled that they were both murdered, and they suspected that the loud banging I had heard that night was the sound of the ex-husband being murdered. To this day, their killer hasn't been caught, and there have been several other unsolved murders at resorts in the same area. The detective on this case did tell me that I was lucky that I didn't become another victim. The cameras in the bar area got an image of the guy who was sitting next to me at the bar that night, and even though you can't see his face in the picture, you can pick out a tattoo on his arm. This ruled out the possibility of it being the ex-husband, because he didn't have any tattoos, and the detective is certain it was their killer. My grandparents own a hotel, and every time my family visited when I was a kid, I'd used to run around with my cousins in some of the areas not used by the public, like the kitchen or unoccupied suites. However, there was one part of the hotel we rarely went to. It was on the top floor, unused except by my grandmother. I didn't know why at the time, but it always struck me as strange because it was a perfectly good suite. There was a kitchen, sink always full of the exact same plates whenever I'd sneak in there, a bedroom, and of course a bathroom. More than any place in the hotel, that was where we weren't allowed. Nobody ever told us why, so being kids, me and my cousins often took it as a challenge to go up there, only for our parents to chase us down and drag us back downstairs. That all changed when I found a man on the toilet one day. I was about 7 at the time, giggling as I explored the unused suite. It was dark and dusty, but the daylight outside provided good lighting all on its own. Good thing, as the electricity in that suite didn't work either. It was when I entered the kitchen that I happened to glance at the open bathroom door, and saw him, the man. He was dressed in funny clothes, a top hat, and suit that looked really old, and his skin was slightly grayish. The moment I saw him, I felt a chill go down my spine. I couldn't move, rooted to the spot as I stared at this man. Then I realized he was looking at me. His eyes were pitch black orbs, without a trace of color. It perfectly matched the handlebar mustache on his lip, one that I thought was vaguely familiar, but couldn't remember where I had seen it. Neither of us moved for a long time. He just sat on the toilet watching me, and I stared right back at him, and I couldn't help wondering where he had come from. Was he a guest who booked out the suite? And why were his eyes pitch black? It was almost like they were... I screamed, because now I knew why his eyes were pitch black. He didn't even have any eyes to begin with. My dad came running up the stairs. I only knew he was there when he grabbed me under his arms and began dragging me away. "Stay," the man with no eyes said, his lips unmoving. "Stay." My dad made sure I didn't, leaving the man sitting on the toilet, alone, watching. Dad left me in the back office with one of the employees while he went back to get my grandmother. Crying and sobbing, I started messing with the security camera display screen, just trying to find something interesting to get my mind off what I had seen. When I changed it to the image of several spider webs over the lens, hiding a dark room. I was about to change to another camera when I saw the spider webs move, almost like something was blowing in them. I blinked, at first thinking this was one of the cameras for outside, but I'd already checked those. Then I saw something come out of the darkness, close enough to completely envelop the lens. It was a pair of grayish lips with a handlebar mustache. Without thinking, I grabbed the screen and hurled it with all my strength at the wall, breaking it. At that moment, my grandmother came in, Dad trailing behind. She banned me from the hotel for over a year. I wasn't even allowed to come to family gatherings. Not that I minded. I didn't want to go back and see that man again. After a time, I rarely went to the hotel. Even after my grandmother lifted the ban, she assured me that she'd replaced the monitor for the security cameras and wanted me back. But no matter how much she begged, I didn't want to. It took some convincing for me to even go to family events. I thought that was it for me, and the man with no eyes. That I'd never see him again, and it was over. I never did hear about him from any of my family, especially my grandmother, until I went to high school and learned of the hotel's sordid history. Over 100 years ago, several young women had gone missing while staying at the hotel. Police investigating found nothing, and people just assumed the women had run off, until a worker at the hotel found their bodies, pickled in barrels in the top floor suite. The owner was charged with murder and hanged. Rumor goes that when he died, ravens came and pecked out his eyes. I never did any research into the rumors, for fear I'd see his face again, but I was not so lucky. It was the day my great-grandfather on my dad's side died that I saw the man with no eyes again. I was sorting through some of his junk, pictures and memorabilia from his childhood. One picture in particular caught my eye. It was of my great-grandfather when he was a little boy. I was stunned to see how much he looked like me when I was a kid. People often told me that, but I never believed it until I saw it for myself. The woman on his right was someone I didn't know, but I guess she was his mother. Then I saw my thumb was covering the man on his left. I moved it, and what I saw made me burn the picture and swear off ever looking into my family tree. Because the man in that photograph, the man whispering in my ear for me to come back, was dressed in a suit and top hat, with a neatly trimmed handlebar mustache and dark eyes. Listen, if you've ever combed the internet for silly little scary games, such as Cat Scratch and Bloody Mary, I hope you don't come across the elevator game and attempt to play. Ever since I was a child, I'd always been fixated with elevators. They were a fun contraption to jump around in, and I always was excited to take a ride in one of those mysterious stainless steel contraptions. But a couple days ago, my friends and I were combing the internet and came across a website that detailed a new game called the Elevator Game. Immediately my interest was piqued, and I began to read farther as my friends became more enthralled, considering I have told my friends about my fascination with elevators. Our dark room was illuminated by the bright monitor's brilliant display. The Elevator Game? That's probably some crappy Snapchat challenge that some middle schoolers came up with. My friend Arthur was always a skeptic, but I understand, considering most of these challenges were dribble anyway. Well, you know I've always been fascinated by elevators, I retorted. Maybe this challenge may have some merit to it. Well, hurry up and see the rules. I want to see what you have to do, and if we can do it tonight. What else do you think we're gonna do tonight? Drink and play Smash? I want to do something new for once. The other voice came from the blue beanbag on the other side of the room. Of course Mike would be asleep on a Friday night. Well, nice of you to join us, Mike. Pull up a chair, and we'll see the rules together, I said. After he groggily moved his beanbag to my desk to my left, I began to scroll down and see the rules of this game. The display listed the rules as followed. 1. Enter the elevator of your choice, alone. Alone? We can't do this challenge together? Mike said, yawning. I looked at him. I guess we'll just take turns then. I'm down. I'm sure this is a load of crap anyway, Arthur said in between swigs of beer. Buzzkill, Mike muttered. 2. Once inside, ensure that the elevator is equipped with more than 13 floors. Oh, 13. So scary, Arthur said, waving his arms. Shut up, I quickly snapped. 3. After following 2, press the button for the 7th floor. 4. After 3, press the button for the 4th floor. 5. After 4, press the button for the 8th floor. This went on for a while, a code that equaled to 748-25169, whatever that meant. But once I got to the 9th instruction, my blood ran cold. 9. When the woman enters the elevator, do not talk to her. A woman? What? Mike was audibly unnerved, and his anxiety was quickly spreading to Arthur and I. It's just trying to be scary. but I gotta say I'm intrigued. If this got Arthur's attention, then this challenge must be pretty interesting. 10. Once the doors open, you have entered the other world. Wait, what? That was all Mike could let out. We were all silent for about 30 seconds, then Arthur spoke. Let's do it. There's the Marriott down the streets. Thing's got like 30 floors. Isn't it like midnight? You sure you want to go? We got class in like 2 days. I was pretty freaked out, and I was just trying to get out of this situation. My mind began to wander as I thought about the other world and the woman. What was this? Was this just some kind of joke? It has to be. There can't just be another world that's only accessible through an elevator, right? We arrived at the Marriott, which is a chain hotel that happens to have one in my town. It was a towering building that pierced the thick nighttime clouds. Of course, it had to look as scary as possible, but I pressed on with Arthur and Mike. As we entered through the carousel into the lobby, I immediately had that gut feeling that something wasn't right. The lobby didn't have a soul in it, save for us. The TV was playing some movie, but the concierge was nowhere to be found, probably in the back, taking a break. Okay, let's go to the side elevators, because we might actually get in trouble for doing this, Arthur rationalized. We agreed, and walked to the side, where the gates parking guests are able to access the hotel. The hotel was completely silent, other than the soft hum of a vending machine. We climbed the hallway until we found a lone, stainless steel elevator. It was pretty nice, considering in every horror movie the elevator is usually a decrepit, out-of-order hunk of junk. So who's going in first? I asked. You're the one that even found this elevator thing in the first place, Mike said. He had a point. I was the elevator enthusiast. I should go first. I walked to the button and pressed it, illuminating the little upwards arrow that was plastered across it. The elevator beeped, like it was waiting for me. I walked in. See you in hell, guys, I remarked to the guys as they nervously waved me goodbye. As I enter, I see 35 buttons. Perfect. Step 1 complete. I reach into my pocket and grab the paper that I wrote the code on. I inputted 748251168. At the final button press, the elevator began to move. My heart began to race, because it was working. The elevator rang, and the display read 6. It stopped, and the doors opened. My heart dropped, because what I saw before me was a woman. She was dressed in pure white, with a red hat that only accentuated the brilliance of her outfit. I couldn't see her face, due to the veil around her face that almost seemed opaque. Her hair was jet black, which was a contrast to her white outfit. She slowly walked in, the only sound being the clacking of her heels as she entered. I was about to say hello, out of instinct, but my mind flashed back to the rules of the game. 9. When the woman enters the elevator, do not talk to her. My blood ran cold, and I looked away from her. Hey. Her voice was as smooth as silk. Excuse me? I need your help. It was getting increasingly difficult to look away from her, and the fear I felt inside was damn near unbearable. Please, at least say something. I looked at her, and didn't say a word. Help me, she said. The elevator stopped. The display read 8. That meant that the ride was complete, and I quickly exited the doors as they opened. It was just another hallway, same as all the others inside the Marriott. What other world was the challenge talking about? As I looked back at the elevator, I saw the woman remove her veil, and I couldn't fathom what I saw. She didn't have any eyes. Not like her eyes were caved out or anything like that, but there was just skin where her eyes should be. I was paralyzed in fear as I saw the elevator doors closed, and I remembered the last instruction. 10. Once the doors open, you have entered the other world. I began to walk through the hallway, wondering what was so different about this new world that I have walked upon. As I walked through the empty hallway, I had a realization that stopped me dead in my tracks. I didn't have a way back. I sprinted back to the elevator and frantically clicked on the button to go back down. The doors opened as I got increasingly woozy. The nausea was becoming unbearable, as I wasn't able to move. The doors opened, and I dragged myself in feeling increasingly weaker. I pressed the first floor button, and collapsed on the floor. The elevator opened, and I crawled out into the lobby. Mike and Arthur were there waiting for me. "Hey, where have you been? It's been like 2 hours," Mike said, but it didn't sound like him. "Are you okay, Mike? You don't sound like yourself." "I'm good." His normally baritone voice sounded pitch-shifted up, and it had an uncanny sound I couldn't shake. The streets were completely empty as we drove back, and almost no lights were on save for the street lights. It was pitch black outside, and we drove in silence. As we arrived to the dorm, I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong here. I wasn't in my own world. I'm not sure what to do, because there were no instructions to escape the other world. How could I be so stupid? I knew this place would be good to put this as a warning sign, and a call for help. Arthur and Mike have not been the same since I came back from the elevator. If anyone can help me with my own predicament, please. I want to return to my own world, and I feel like my innards are being torn apart. I don't feel real. I don't belong. Hey everyone, I just wanted to let everyone know that I made it safely back to my world. Or what seems like it. But what I saw will resonate with me for the rest of my life. Before I detail what happened, I'd like to thank you all for giving me insight in my time of need, even if you people are otherworldly beings, but nonetheless, thank you for your help. Sorry for this post to be unable to be uploaded in a timely manner, but I'm still pretty messed up in terms of time, due to my time in the other world. Other than that, I thank you all for helping me in this time of need. As I nervously scrolled through the many suggestions, I saw most of you tell me to try to look up the rules of this game. That's where I got to the bottom of this entire debacle. Beforehand, I want to apologize for not giving all the details of my feelings and thoughts when I was participating in the game. When I detailed my initial adventure into the other world, I was near hysterical, and was only trying to give the least amount of context so I can get help faster. Now that I'm back, or at least I think I'm back, I will give every detail of the unfathomable experience I had on my return trip to our world. On the subject of Mike and Arthur, I intend to detail the experience with them as well. Let's get started, shall we? When I was in the other world, watching the elevator doors close, my sense of panic instantly flared throughout my body. It didn't feel instinctual like it should. The scariest thing that I noticed about the other world is that the hallway I walked through, on floor 8, was like any other hallway. Despite the usual whirring of the vending and ice machines that were next to me being completely silent. During my panic attack that I had upon realizing my own idiocy, for not even knowing to come back, I felt someone, or something, watching me. As I began to collapse, I felt my muscles failing me, and I had the feeling of pins and needles running up my skin as I attempted to move. Like the feeling when one is in sleep paralysis. When I returned to the lobby and I saw Arthur and Mike, they were not moving. Not like completely frozen, but more like an idle NPC in a video game, just staring lifelessly into the void. Only when I looked in their direction is when Mike snapped out of his trance and began talking to me. Arthur, however, was completely silent, even when I attempted to tell them any recollection of my journey. The thing that disturbed me the most was whenever I even attempted to speak to the two, my throat would not let out the words. You know when you're in a nightmare and you want to scream your heart out for help, when the monster or what have you is about to kill you, or someone you love, but nothing comes out? This was like that, and it was the most surreal thing I have ever experienced. So I had to sit there in pure silence. Wait, silence? There was no hum or sound coming from, well, anything. The world seemed to be on mute. As I sat watching Mike blankly drive, I began to think about the game, and where it's supposed to transport me. The other world. What is that even supposed to be? From what I could tell, I had landed myself in some sort of bizarro version of my own world, like a parallel universe. Looking outside my window, the usually lit buildings of the downtown area were pitch black, almost like a blackout had taken out the entire city's power supply. The only things keeping the darkness from completely enveloping the car was the headlights on the front. and they barely did a good job at that. My stomach began to become violently nauseous, and I convulsed from the uncomfort. I felt like I was being ripped apart from the inside, almost like I was imploding. I bit down on my lip, knowing from habit that my dorm was about 2 minutes away. Thinking about it, how did I get inside this car? Why am I inside this car? Wasn't I inside the hotel lobby? My mind thought back to speaking to Mike, when he had snapped out of his NPC-like trance. As he walked up to me, I saw him, but he didn't look like him. His usual short and stocky stature had seemed elongated, and his normally baritone voice seemed like it was pitch-shifted by a program. He looked out of focus, like his shape wasn't a shape that could fit my normal human perception. It was distorted in a way that made him seem otherworldly, like the third dimension would not allow him to convert from wherever the hell he's from. When we began to talk, I just somehow popped into the car watching the two drive in silence. Not like a teleportation or the like, but just an instant change of scenery, like a scratched DVD that skips into a new scene in an instant manner. Despite this, my mind didn't even fathom it. I just somehow happened to enter the car in my own perception, but the time skip barely came as a recollection 15 minutes into the drive. Wait, had it really been 15 minutes? I pulled out my phone and looked at the time. What came staring back shocked me. I was staring at my empty palm. There was no phone in my pocket, nor was there one inside of the car. As I shifted my eyes to the clock on the dashboard, I was met with Arthur's empty face. There were no features on it. No beard, nose, eyes, mouth, cheeks. Hell, not even hair. He was just an empty, smooth face. Despite no eyes or the like, I was still completely paralyzed with fear. He looked directly at me, made a gesture that resembled a phone, and slowly shook his head. I began to type into the search bars ways to communicate with people about paranormal events and such, and all signs pointed to here. I wiped sweat off my brow as I began typing up my post for some help. Why am I here? What the hell? I was still in the car. How am I sitting here in my dorm? All I remembered was Arthur's face, or lack thereof. As I sat down, trying not to break down, I looked at the post, and it had read posted 8 hours ago. 8 hours? I had just posted it. My sense of place was being completely compromised as I stared at the fan on the ceiling. I looked at the comments about 5 minutes later in pure silence. The comments that were on the board were completely rational solutions to escape. Hell, some even sent links to rule guides. As I clicked on it, my mind became ablaze with pain, as Arthur's skinless face was the only thing in my vision. I screamed as pain enveloped my body, and just like that, I was back sitting at my desk as if time itself was being manipulated. I looked at the rest of the comments, and saw that even I had made some myself. Maybe in a trance or whatever had happened, I was subconsciously typing. Despite this, I had my answers. I had entered the code to the elevator wrong. It was 748-25169, and I had entered 8 instead of the 9 at the end of the combination. I began to think this was the case, and it made sense that a mess up like this could send me to whatever this place is. I also saw others give me advice to plug the code in backwards, and do the same game backwards to revert myself back from this place. That was the only hope I had. The only hope for escaping whatever this was. In an instant, the hotel lobby was staring directly at me. It's almost like whatever was watching me or leading me along wanted me to come back to the hotel. Maybe it saw me as an intruder, and was just trying to lead me back to my home, or had more sinister reasons for my instant return. The lobby had that telltale silence, and I knew I had to return. The paper in my hand had the original code, and it written inverted as well. This was my only shot. I knew I needed to take it, or risk staying in this reality forever. I walked up to the elevator, and pressed the button to go up. As the doors opened and I walked in, I saw Arthur's face out of the corner of my eye watching. The doors closed, and I was met with the claustrophobic silence of the elevator. I began to enter the code backwards, ensuring I put it right this time, 96152-847. Right then the elevator began to move, and right on cue when the floor hit 6, The woman in red and white entered the contraption. My blood ran cold as she stared at me through her opaque veil. "Hey, can you help me?" Her voice was as silky as ever, but I steeled myself and knew to not listen. She asked once more, "Help me." In that instant, she looked at me dead in the eyes with her skinless face, being its own entity. She rushed over to me in what seemed like an instant and began to claw at me. My fight or flight kicked in and knew I had no choice but to fight. She screamed as she clawed at my desperate arms, cutting them open various times. Pain erupted in my arms as blood began to drop at an alarming rate. I knew I didn't have much time if I were to falter now. I knew I had to do something, and my instinct led to the single most stupid, but reasonable action I could have taken. I held her clawing arms back with my left hand, and mustering all the courage and strength I had left, I swung my right hand and connected with her smooth, skinless face. She flew back, and uncannily caught herself and just froze. She was frozen like a paused show. She just stared at me with the piercing eyes of nothing. But then I heard a sound. The only sound I ever heard inside of this other realm. It was a cracking noise, and I saw her smooth, skinless face break open like an egg. But what it revealed under, I simply can't put into words. If there was any way for me to describe what was under, I would, but I simply can't. It was truly otherworldly, and my own mind was driven to madness seeing it. It was nothing. Nothing was inside her head. Now, I don't mean her head was hollow. Far from it. It was filled with the infinite nothing. In popular culture, we all come to agree that nothing is perceived as a black or white void with no sense of place. But what I saw was absolutely nothing. It wasn't a color. It wasn't a plane, or had any cohesive shape to it. It was infinite nothing. She or it looked into my soul, and all I heard was distant wailing, as if the voice had been a mile away. It was a distinctive woman's yelling. After the screams ended, after what seemed like an eternity, I saw the woman disappear, as if she was never there in the first place. I sat down, trying to understand all that had happened, but couldn't fathom what happened for the life of me. I was snapped out of my reverie by the dinging of the elevator, and I blindly walked out only to meet an endless pit of darkness. I began to enter freefall, and looking back I saw a sight that was almost more bizarre than the woman. It was an almost infinite amount of elevators, all strung together in this black void. There were too many to even comprehend, but I only had a glimpse as I continued down into the void. I had honestly wanted this nightmare to be over, and if what's meeting me at the bottom of this void was death, I welcomed it. I fell for what seemed like an infinite amount of time. If this was hell, it sure felt like it. And just like that, I saw something. In my free fall, I saw a lone light that seemed almost unfathomably far away. Despite the length, it came into view very quickly. It was an elevator. I began to realize I was heading on a direct path to it. I screamed as I came into contact with the elevator, its hard exterior crushing all the bones in my body, killing me instantly. Wait, I'm not dead. I look at my arm, and only faint scars had been left burnt in it. My clothes looked tattered as I began to look at my surroundings. It was an elevator, and the display read 1. I had just hit the lobby, and the doors creaked open. I slowly walked out, and saw I was in the lobby of the Marriott. I heard the doors close, and I looked behind myself to see that there was no elevator, only a wall that had a promo for free continental breakfast in the morning for guests. What the hell? Ryan, where did you run off to? You were in the bathroom probably. It's been like 15 minutes, bro. Upon seeing Mike, I burst into tears and embraced him. Okay, you alright? Your clothes look tattered to hell. What happened? Mike seemed genuinely concerned. Nothing, man. I'll tell you about it in the car. Let's get out of here. Arthur ran up to us concerned. Thank God he had his face. I felt normal in this world. The sounds were in full force. The hum of the AC, whir of the vending machine. It all came together like a glorious crescendo of noise. I was back. We drove home as I attempted to explain what had just occurred. Sorry to say, man, but I think you had a bad acid trip or something. Mike was pretty skeptical, which was out of character for him. I for one believe you. You think elevators are gateways to other worlds? And then bam, you found proof. But where did the elevator you went go? Arthur was very enthusiastic, unlike his usual cynical demeanor. I'm pretty sure you had an energy drink or something from the lobby as I had my adventure. The two went home about 30 minutes ago, and I'm left to my own. All I want to say is thank you. From this world and the other world. Thank you for helping me come back to my reality, or at least something close to it. I still think to that elevator, and the infinite amount of elevators I had found in that void. Was this all a bad dream? Or did I find something far more existential than I can comprehend? Maybe I did find a true way to travel in between universes. All in all, stay away from this game. My frantic self telling you the rules in my previous post? Disregard that. Just heed my story as a warning to all. Don't play the elevator game, because you may be trapped somewhere you can't fathom, or find something you may not want to find. But if you are stupid enough to do it, heed the rules, and be safe. I still see Arthur's featureless face in the corner of my eye, watching me, giving me silent judgment for my decision to cross over. Maybe this is my curse, to have this thing to watch my every move. Almost as a guardian angel of sorts, or something more sinister. I don't really care what. As long as I'm inside my world. Despite this, I gotta go. I need to get some sleep after all of this. My stomach's hurting like hell. Don't play this game.
Doctors/surgeons/nurses of Reddit, what's the worst thing you experienced while at work? Taking care of a fall patient that broke her pelvis. She just found out her husband had cancer and she wouldn't be there for him. She was crying, telling me that he was there for every appointment and treatment when she had cancer, and now he'd have to go through it alone. When I was a CNA, I got into a situation where I didn't have gloves on and got poop on my hand. I scrubbed like everything after and moved on with my night. A while later I absent-mindedly chewed my fingernail and tasted, you guessed it, poop. I vomited and dry heaved. Ran to the bathroom and scrubbed my mouth out with soap. It took a while for that taste to go away. Ah, the good old CNA days. I remember giving this old man a shower that needed assistance and a shower chair. While he was sitting down, I kneeled down to wash under his legs and was behind the back of the chair. He proceeded to have the loudest, most explosive diarrhea/fart I've ever witnessed. Needless to say, some of it ended up in my face. Watching another nurse pulling a fall mat away from a patient's floor next to her bed. When asked why, she said in front of the patient, she about to die anyway. Her mouth was stuck open because she was so emaciated, but she could still cry. Her frozen face somehow allowed her to still cry after she heard that, and she did for a long time. I sat there with her. The patient was in custody of the state, a mental hospital, and they chose to withhold food and water. A type of forced DNR. She was around 90-something. We were forced to watch her slowly starve to death. I quit right after that. Had to tell a guy he had killed his mother whilst he was high on methamphetamine. Former paramedic, long story short, got a call for what turned out to be a very dead, decomposing man who had passed alone in his apartment. His body was filled with gas, fairly common to be honest. As I'm standing by the body calling the hospital to give them a heads up about what's about to come their way and get approval to move, new EMT decides to poke gas-filled body. It explodes. He loses a hand and a trillion vaporized bits of dead old man cover me, got in my open mouth, under my clothes, etc. Taste was awful. After hundreds of showers I could still smell corpse on me. My SO at the time said every time she nuzzled me or got close to my hair, she could smell it too. It was like that for about a week. Still makes me gag to think about, and that kid's life was pretty much permanently changed. Wait, the new EMT lost a hand in a body explosion? Yup. A lot of gas can accumulate in dead bodies, and if it gets trapped, it can be almost like a bomb. New guy was kneeling next to the body, I think this was his first serious call because he had that kind of glazed over, I'm in shock, look in his eyes, and he put his hand on the guy's stomach. It sank down into this bloated, gas-filled sack until said sack just broke. My crude chief said it would be like sinking your fist into a box of firecrackers. Honestly, not sure how he came up with that analogy and didn't really work in my mind. But yeah. Dead body exploded, got gunk everywhere and took off the EMT's hand. Longest incident report I have ever filed. I frequently experience terminally ill patients dying in excruciating pain with no euthanasia laws to support them, and people like my mother, who was, also an experienced ERRN, and who also asked for similar assistance when she was dying. Vet nurse here. Had a staffy come in one night whose labor had stopped. We gave her the drug she needed and the labor started back up. Sadly, it had stalled for so long that the next 3 pups up the line were dead. Their placental sacs were already green and necrotic looking. We managed to save the last 2. Now, we let mom have a normal labor with normal behaviors, so this meant that she ate those 3 necrotic placental sacs. Naturally, mom then threw this up but onto her 2 surviving pups. It was a lot in a small round bed and I was afraid the pups would aspirate, so I quickly stuck my hands into the mess and picked them up. But this also lifted the smell straight up and into my very soul. In the very next heartbeat I threw up on mum. It's the only time my job has made me sick and was one of the worst nights at work ever. I was sitting here horrified at the thought of all that as well and then went back and read, vet nurse, and it all made sense. This case in my internship made me give up on specializing in pediatrics. Young boy got brought in for rheumatic heart disease, already in heart failure. Apparently, this all started from a minor skin infection and went all the way up into his heart valves. We met him already in the PICU. He was still conscious and able to talk, and so for his first day we built a sort of rapport. The next morning, before my friends and I clocked out, he wasn't looking so great, so the resident in charge called in the general surgery team to perform a cut-down to expose his veins for access. I had to hold down the poor kid during the procedure, since local anesthesia could only do so much. He was screaming so I told him, "Just hold on, we'll get through this." He nodded and said okay. That was the last conversation we had. When I came in for my next shift he was already intubated. The only parent with him was his father since his mother was employed overseas. Now for many of these cases, a letter to the employer is needed to explain why so and so must go home in this case of family emergency. I volunteered to draft the letter and send it out so we could get this lady on a flight soon and have her come home for her son. As soon as I put the last period on that letter, I was typing in the nurse's station, the kid coded just a few feet away. We couldn't bring him back. The next worst part of course was telling his father what had just happened and asking if he wanted us to stop the resuscitation. That conversation will stay with me. No one should have to bury a child due to something so preventable. Not a nurse but a tech working on becoming a nurse. I've got a few stories. The saddest one was a woman who had an aggressive but treatable cancer. She was riddled with guilt from all the debt her family was incurring, and broke down when she told me she wished she would just die soon so that the debt would stop accumulating. That one hurt to hear. And then the grossest thing I've had. In addition to the guy that was throwing poo at me every time I stepped in the room, I had a patient that was over 500 pounds. I had been told that she had a sacral wound, and that during the night I would need to prep her for surgery in the morning. So the night is going on, everyone is crapping themselves repeatedly and I'm trying to keep up. Then I go to get this woman's bed prepped for the surgeon. I step in the room and this lady tells me that she's had a bowel movement. I did not need her to tell me. It looked like she was sitting in a tub of old, congealed pudding. It leaked down the sides of the bed and had spilled out onto the floor. At this point I backed out of the room and went to get some backup on this situation. So, there's another tech and 4 nurses, for a total of 6 of us that were going to tackle this. Each of us had at least 3 contact gowns on, and we put on 2 masks with a layer of alcohol swabs and Vapo rub in between them. Basically, everything short of going in with full hazmat gear, but honestly, I wouldn't have turned down a nice Tyvek suit. So we step into the room and all get to cleaning the rancid swamp out of the room. And I mean cleaning it off of things that should never have had poo on them. So it's finally cleaned up to the point that we can actually approach the bed and get to work on the patient. We all position ourselves properly to roll her to the side, and it takes all of us to roll her. I happen to be on the butt-facing side for this, pushing her up. As we get her on her side, I see some gauze packed into her butt wound. Not unusual, but I knew it would be pretty gross. Problem was that the gauze had become one with the fecal material at this point, and so I basically had to reach in and start unpacking it with my hands. And it just kept going deeper. I was prepared for a nasty wound. I was not prepared to be elbow deep in this woman's butt, and as I unpacked it the smell of rot and feces began to hit, even through our defenses. One of the nurses stepped out and threw up into one of the vomit bags. So here I am, elbow deep inside a woman, cleaning the remnants of Lake Michigan off of her literal tailbone. And apparently accidentally snagged a couple sensitive spots, because of the couple times she yelled out and smacked me in the head. Eventually we managed to get the wound clean, packed it with fresh bandaging, and disinfected the whole bed, and finally she was ready for surgery. I had that smell trapped in my nose for a couple days afterwards. Just about all of us needed a few minutes to retch, and in some cases vomit a little after the whole ordeal. And then I got to go back to check in on my turd-throwing friend again. Application to med school now and bin. CNA worst things you experience are the people you're not allowed to euthanize. The people who live in agonizing hell for decades, where you feel like a torturer when you're holding them down to let the nurse stick her 30 centimeters suction tube down their throat. I felt bad when I had to help force this man to stay alive. I wish I could take every euthanasia critic to show him/her the suffering some people go through because we force them to live. Life just is effed up at times. Sometimes we're powerless and death is just the best option. Diarrhea blood fountain. Edit, because people asked for the story. I was a third-year med student on my 3-month internal medicine rotation. For people who don't know, this is generally the time in your life where you feel the most stupid every minute of every day. I had arrived for work just barely on time at 4:30 a.m. for my 5/7 3-hour shift. Of course I was dressed to the nines because medicine is stupid sometimes and you have to dress to impress. Tie, nice shoes, slacks, button up, that sorty thing. Might as well have had on tails and a top hat. Imagine a monocle for effect. I started rounding of course. I went in to see Mr. Hippa. I had seen him for several days at this point and he was usually pretty chipper. He had been in the ICU for a GI bleed, but had done great and now stepped down to the floor. This morning he wasn't talking very much. That's not unusual though, it was 4:42 a.m. and I was barely conscious myself. But something felt off and there was just an odor in the room. My spider sense was tingling so I checked the bathroom. They always say you only have to smell Molina once to never forget. This was my once. The floor, the toilet, the walls, were covered in that inky black butt spray. I was assaulted by the pungent aroma of iron shavings and death. It was icky. So I went. Oh crap, Mr. Hippa. I'll be right back. I toddled off to find one of my residents. Those lazy bums didn't usually wander in until after 5. Managed to find my chief who seemed uninterested in what I had to say. I wasn't Chicken Little, I had never cried wolf before. I remember this seemed fairly important and him showing no interest whatsoever. Bad resident, no donut. So I went to the real power on the floor, the nurse's station. They promptly did the wrong thing too. They check his BP and systolic is in the low 80s. Prior had always hovered in the 130/40s. My internal dialogue is screaming. That boy ain't right. But my third-year medical student body is standing there, now surrounded by multiple nurses, just trying not to get in the way and trying not to look even more stupid or say the wrong thing. Well, they want to move him to the chair. I still, all these years later, have no idea why. I managed to squeak out should we be standing him up right now given the crazy low BP and massive blood loss? But an M.S.3. Speaking is like a fart in the wind, so I went unheard. So we stand him up. I'm holding onto his left arm, another nurse on his right. He had little strength to support himself. A half a gallon of blood-tinged crap, or crap-tinged blood? Promptly falls out of his butt onto the floor. I mean it literally fells. Imagine moving your china cabinet and it tilts a little bit and the dishes just fall. It didn't squirt, or spray. It just fell as a mass, hitting the floor and splashing out. At that point Mr. Hippa decides, enough with being conscious. And promptly passes the F out. It could have been something to do with, he now had a HGB around 3 and went from laying to standing with a BP on the lower end of life compatibility. Now, I'm a regular-sized big guy, 6 feet, 200 pounds. My nurse was 5'3", 120 pounds. Mr. Hippo was 6'3", 250 pounds. There was no stopping this fall once it began. Timber. He fell face forward and planted right into his bed. Crisis averted. My moment of joy was instantly changed to terror as I looked down at his bare butthole, jackknifed into the air like a Whataburger A-frame. Then it happened. Diarrhea blood fountain. The perfect symmetry of it as it exploded from his butt is something I'll never forget. It was like the Bellagio, or Buckingham Fountain in Chicago. Just this perfect fluid dynamic cone that reached 1.5 feet into the air, then gently allowed gravity to pull it down, making that gorgeous trumpet-like flare. Except it was made of diarrhea and blood. Before I could think, suddenly Spy Break by the Propeller Heads was playing. For those not in the know, that was the song that played in the lobby scene in The Matrix. I, in my tie and fancy clothes, was Neo. My concrete pillars were the various nurses. They took hit after hit, while I dodged like Christian Bale in Equilibrium. I danced, I juked, I spun like no one has ever spun before. I was the Fred Astaire of crap swerving. When it was all said and done, 3 nurses lost their lives that day, meaning were covered in crap, while I, who had been staring down that fleshy barrel, had gotten away without one speck of red or brown or black on me. The outcome. Mr. Hippo went back to the ICU, little bit of PRBC, another embolization, and he was home happy and healthy 2 weeks later. I got in trouble for not letting my resident know what was going on. What? And as far as I'm aware, those nurses are still showering to this day. I was an operating room nurse and I assisted a hemipelvectomy after a large vehicle crushed a patient's whole left hip. The connections were severed, his bladder was in tatters and the whole left leg had died, so it had to be amputated from the hip. I held the leg the whole time. Worst part is that it was a 9-year-old boy. Not me but my wife, had a toddler about 2 to 3 years old come in with severe burning to the lower half of his body. Like, the way she described it was, his skin was bubbly and peeling. Turned out his aunt had been babysitting him and became angry when the kid spilled his drink on himself. So she ran a scalding hot bath and basically dipped the poor child in and left him. The person in the next apartment heard screaming, so called the cops. People refusing medicine for their children. I get if it's you, because it's your decision. If it's a child, then you are putting someone else's life at risk. I have no problem with people using essential oils, if they actually get proper treatment. Some kid had a cut on his foot and his parents put vodka on it, which causes harm to healthy tissue and can harm more than it helps. Kid got an infection and almost lost his foot.